Hello, and welcome to the second session in the Middle School Magic series, Loving Your Data Through the Dropout Early Warning Systems, also known as DEWS. If you joined our first session, you got to hear from Omarina and the power of data and the true and long-lasting impact that the relationships that she developed in middle school had on her adult life. We do still have that recording, and we have the follow-up recording with Omarina if you're interested. Also, at our last session, we were able to connect with teacher and student Alex and Patrick, who connected at the middle school and really talked about what they put in place at the middle school to have some impact on Alex's long-term success, who is now graduating from high school and going into college. So let us know if you'd like that video too. So today we're going to talk about, get into more detail about collecting that data and digging into your dropout early warning systems, your DEWS data, which you'll access through WISE- for districts. Or if you don't have access to that, how you can use your student information system in your district and still start to collect some of those data points that could lead to potential risk factors for students not graduating from high school. Today is just a start of a conversation, whether you're new to DEWS or whether you're new to this conversation, it's a beginning. We're going to dig into how to get to your data and how to analyze that, allow you to have some conversations about the students that you work with, and then some possible middle school interventions that you might want to consider then putting into place. If you've noticed any trends with the conversations with students, or if there's something an individual student would need, we can help match some of the research to what your district needs. Just a little bit of background, the Transition Improvement Grant, if you've worked with us before, a lot of our work focuses on increasing graduates and decreasing dropout rates for students with IEPs in Wisconsin, but also improving our post-school outcomes for students. Really, the tool that we're going to spend time talking about today, or the process, the DEWS or your student information system, is a universal application, something we can do universally for all students that will increase graduation rates for all students in Wisconsin. On the left, you'll notice TIG does offer most of our work focuses on looking at some of those in-depth data reviews for students with IEPs. We do provide technical assistance and training, and a lot of our work is very focused on formal transition and graduation rate planning for students with disabilities in Wisconsin. If you're joining as a team, or you're joining as a solo participant, we'll get into how you can then sort out some of this data to look at students with disabilities or all students that you work with. Again, we can't stress enough that this is a universal tool to use for all of our students. This slide might look familiar if you joined us for the first session. And now that we're starting to dig into this data, we just wanted to bring that in as a reminder that data really does give us power. It might be one part of the conversation, but it really starts to guide us down what we need to know to move outcomes forward for our students. So just a reminder that Robert Balfans, who you saw in the video with Omarina, is the director of Everyone Graduate Center at Johns Hopkins University. And he's done a lot of the extensive research into identifying these early warning signs. And we're going to get into that in a little bit more depth today. But I think the biggest piece for us to focus on is that moment when we can predict that students are at risk of dropping out really can be tracked back to middle school. So a lot of our time with you is to really focus on having those conversations, looking at our data to put those interventions in support or in place earlier versus later to increase outcomes for students in Wisconsin.
So as we're thinking about graduation rates, that's not something that's traditionally a topic discussed in middle school. As Brenda alluded to in the previous slide, graduation and setting students up for success does come back to middle school and does come back to those early grades. So we wanted to share with you the importance of why graduation rates really impact the trajectory of a student's life, as well as the trajectory of the community at large. So successful completion of high school is a critical prerequisite to success after high school. We know that individuals who have a high school diploma are considered for jobs that aren't even open or available to students who do not have a high school diploma. In addition to that, we know that post-secondary education and training opportunities require a high school diploma. So students who do not graduate from high school typically experience lower rates of employment, lower incomes, and higher rates of incarceration when compared to their peers who did graduate from high school. From the research from the Johns Hopkins University, Dr. Balfans, and the Everyone Graduate Center, we do know that we can cite symptoms of risk for a student all the way back to middle school. These symptoms include earning a final grade of F in math or English or those core classes, demonstrating an attendance rate below 80%, and having an unsatisfactory behavioral grade on a report card. We also know that that transition from middle to high school is so imperative. We know that that 9th grade year is the make or break year for most students. We know that students who are earning fewer than 2 credits during their 9th grade year, again, are demonstrating attendance below 75% and earn a grade point average lower than a 2.0. We know that those students will be at a greater risk of not completing high school in 4 years or not completing high school at all and dropping out of high school. So if we can know that this relationship goes all the way back to middle school and we can start to identify some symptoms of risk, we can intervene to support students at a much earlier age. So when they get to that high school age and that make or break year, that they're set up on a path to be successful. Before we dig deeper into this, let's take a look at graduation rates in Wisconsin.
Graduation is an exciting time. Graduation is an exciting time. It marks the beginning of a world of opportunities. It opens doors for careers, more achievements, personal growth, respect, and independence. Unfortunately, not all of our students will see this new beginning. Not all of our students will graduate. Statistics from the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction WISE portal show large gaps between 2 groups in relation to graduation. The first group is based on race or ethnicity. When looking at the 4-year and 5-year cohorts, we can see the different graduation rates for students receiving a regular diploma. One would hope that these would all be fairly close, but as you can see, this is not the case. In the last 4 years, Wisconsin has demonstrated the largest gap in the nation between white and black students in terms of graduation rate. In 2016-2017, the adjusted cohort rate shows a 26% disparity between white and black students. The second largest gap is between students without disabilities and students with disabilities. The 4-year cohort shows a gap of almost 24%. The 5-year adjusted cohort rate is a little better, but still shows a gap of 17.5%. So not only is there a large gap, but many students with disabilities that do graduate tend to take more than 4 years to do so, almost 8% compared to just over 1% of students without disabilities. Over 92% of students in general education will receive a regular diploma. Unfortunately, only 68.5% of students in special education will receive a regular diploma. The number of students that will continue to pursue high school completion, taking more than 4 years to complete high school, is 6.5 times greater for students with disabilities. In addition, twice as many students with special education services do not continue to pursue high school completion at all. The number of students in this cohort receiving an equivalency diploma, other completion diploma, or reaching the maximum age is similar, but students with special education are still slightly higher. This gap is also reflected when we look at Wisconsin's dropout rates. Our largest gap is again between white and black students. Almost 6 times as many black students drop out compared to white students. When viewing dropout rates of students with and without disabilities, we see that the number of students with disabilities that drop out is more than twice that of students without disabilities. In comparison, just over 1% of students without a disability will drop out, while almost 2.5% of students with a disability will drop out. So what can we do, and what does this mean? By working together, we can increase our graduation rate for all students. Increasing our graduation rate by just 1% could mean 50 new jobs for our students. an additional $12.4 million in earnings, $2 million in additional federal tax revenue, and $960,000 in state and local tax revenue. 1% could also result in $16.6 million in savings on healthcare, and it could spark the economy with an additional $9.4 million in consumer spending. So yes, graduation can mark the beginning of this great new world of opportunities for our students. We want every child to succeed, college and career ready. You may ask, what can educators do to increase the graduation rate and prepare all students to be college and career ready? There are several evidence-based practices to support students with disabilities in Wisconsin. These include collecting Indicator 14 data annually to monitor college and career readiness of exiters, reviewing the Dropout early warning system to identify students who may be at risk of not graduating, completing a graduation rate improvement plan and/or a transition improvement plan to identify areas of need and plan targeted interventions, and tracking individual students through progress monitoring to ensure targeted interventions are appropriate and supporting the student's needs. While we help students work towards their diploma, post-secondary education, career, and independence, we need to look at providing equitable opportunities and closing the gaps. Remember, graduation impacts everyone in our community.
This would be a good time, if you are working together as a team, to pause your video and have some discussion around what were some connections, similarities, and differences that you saw from this video to the population and the demographics of students within your school district. One of the things that was pointed out through the video, as well as our previous slides, was talking about the use of the Dropout early warning system through the Department of Public Instruction. We want to note that the Dropout early warning system comes from research that was done through first the Everyone Graduates Center, and then secondly, through the American Institutes for Research. We're going to watch this short video to share why it is so important to use early warning system data.
High school graduation and receiving a high school diploma is a really critical milestone for students. Students who don't receive a diploma are far more likely to be unemployed, are at much greater risk during recessions to be unemployed, and are much more likely to receive welfare benefits or other types of benefits from states and federal government. So there's a great burden not only for the individual, but on society. An early warning system is an indicator or symptom of risk. For example, ninth graders who miss 10% or more of school days are far less likely than their peers to graduate from high school. In middle school, students who miss 20% or more of school days are far less likely to graduate from high school. And you can even look at those data within the first 20 days of school. So you can identify students who are at risk in either middle school or ninth grade within the first 20 days of school to intervene and start providing support so that they can get back on track for high school graduation. At AIR, my work in early warning systems actually began focusing on just summarizing the available indicators to identify students who are at risk. And we quickly realized that this was a really easy opportunity for schools and districts to start really changing outcomes for kids. So we developed a simple Excel-based tool that was free and downloadable by schools and districts and was subsequently downloaded by 20,000 individual users from across the nation to be able to import their own data and identify and flag students who are at risk. The Every Student Succeeds Act really makes early warning systems pertinent right now. In the Act, states are required to identify high schools that have below a 67% high school graduation rate as low performing and require them to implement an evidence-based strategy. Early warning systems is an evidence-based strategy that can really lead to improved outcomes for these students. An early warning system works best when it is used in conjunction with educators' professional judgment, diagnosing what students' needs are, and providing supports that meet those needs. It's really important that an early warning system indicator doesn't just become another label for students. It needs to be a means for educators to be able to take action to change outcomes for students.
So a few things to point out from that video. As she talked about that downloadable Excel form, it's important to note that the Department of Public Instruction was one of the case studies in this initial work in early warning systems through the AIR. And the Dropout early warning system came directly from that work. Another piece that we want to point out, using the early warning system can really poise a middle school to set up students for success. So once they're transitioning into the high school level, we know that they're on track to continue their work to be college and career ready. One of the things that you saw in the first video when we looked at the exit and the discrepancies between students with disabilities and students without disabilities, as well as students by race in Wisconsin, we know that there are large achievement gaps that we're seeing. We know that there are groups of marginalized students who are not receiving the same opportunities or who are not meeting the same outcomes as their peers. One of the pieces that's important to think about when we are starting to have some of those individual conversations with students is the use of culturally responsive problem solving. And this work came from Dr. Marquita Newell, who partnered with the Department of Public Instruction to put together some learning modules to allow for districts to be able to have some deeper conversations around how they can support students who had typically been marginalized in the past. In the link below where you see Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, you can click on that link and it will take you to not only a video of when she gave a presentation around culturally responsive problem solving, but will also take you to modules that were created collaboratively to help support school districts and teams in looking at how they can utilize culturally responsive problem solving. One of the pieces that Dr. Newell talked about were attributes that we are using that really promote deficit thinking rather than proactive thinking and thinking about students and what they're bringing to the table. So 3 different attributes that lead into that deficit thinking that Dr. Newell proposes that we reframe and move our group forward to really think about what can the school do to support students are unfound, untrue, and unalterable attributes. The first one, unfound, means that there's no evidence to prove this thinking. Untrue attributes are statements that are simply untrue about a student. For example, if we were working and looking at a student who was Black and someone from the team said, oh, well, we're having a hard time working with this student because their parent is not very responsive to our calls. It doesn't seem like they care about the student's education like they should. This is an untrue statement. At this time, as a team, we would want to work together to reframe that statement and move again onto something that is in the locus of control of the team. Finally, unalterable attributes. These are things that we cannot change, or again, are outside of the locus of control of the school. An example for this, if we have a student who is missing many classes, similar to Omarina talking about her early experiences when she was in middle school, a lot of that had to do with the fact that she was evicted and she had to move across the city. That is something that is unalterable. The school cannot change those circumstances in a student's life. Therefore, it's really important, again, to reframe and think about what can the school do to support the student rather than just using that unalterable attribute as an excuse or a removal of our importance to be able to support the student. If you would like to dig deeper into culturally responsive problem solving, as this is a much larger training and the modules can help to support some great work between your team or within your school district, again, please feel free to click on the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction link on this PowerPoint, and it will bring you to those resources. As we're digging into data, however, we are going to go back to those symptoms of risk that were previously identified in our slides. Some data points to consider for teams are as follows. Mobility. So these would be those movements between schools or between districts. So again, if you're in a larger district and you have a student moving from school to school to school, we know that that mobility plays an impact on a student's ability to be able to connect and be engaged in school. The second is behavior. So really thinking about those negative or inappropriate behaviors that result in disciplinary action. So did the student get a referral? Were they removed from the classroom? Were they removed from that instruction and those opportunities to grow as a student? The third is attendance. Again, that daily attendance rate is so important because we know that students need that exposure to instruction. They need that exposure to social opportunities. This helps them grow as a student. And finally, a symptom of risk that teams can identify are academic achievement points. So performance on statewide assessments, course performance. And then once a student gets to high school, that progression piece. Are they earning the credits that they need to earn to move to the next grade level? As mentioned before, the Department of Public Instruction has what's called the Dropout Early Warning System. This is a tool in WISE- for districts. Here in the Dropout Early Warning System, teams can look at individual students, grades 6, 7, 8, and 9, and identify if they are at a greater risk of not completing high school within 4 years or from dropping out of high school. It really can allow us to it almost can serve as a check engine light and can really identify like who are some students that we are seeing some of these symptoms of risk, and it can allow the team then to have some discussion around what are some interventions or supports that we can put in place to support that student to get them back on track. You see on your screen the low, moderate, and high risk factors. This is how the Dropout Early Warning System works. You'll be able to look at an individual student's name and you'll be able to see their risk level relating to mobility, discipline, attendance, and then academic achievement. But please note with academic achievement in DEWS, it really looks at that statewide assessment piece and compares them to their peers. However, you can also monitor grades or credits. What the Dropout Early Warning System does then is it takes all 4 of these categories and averages out a low, moderate, or high risk for a student to not complete high school within 4 years or drop out of high school. Students who are at moderate and high risks, it serves as one piece of data that can help a team to have some discussion around what can we do to best support students. You see on the left-hand side of your screen, however, a puzzle piece that says DEWS. It's important to note, just as we saw in that video from AIR, that this is one data point. This is one piece of the puzzle. We know that as a school district, you guys know so many more pieces of information on your students and what makes them tick and what they're interested in and what's going on in their outside life. The goal through using the Dropout Early Warning System is really to take this data piece and all of the other information that you have on a student and work together to develop a plan to support students who are most in need. To help you do this, the Transition Improvement Grant has developed 2 different tools that will help to support this data inquiry. The first is a DEWS data dig form, and bear with me for a second while I open this up. With this form, you are given instructions on how to pull up the information on the Dropout Early Warning System if you're not familiar. Again, you need to get into WISE- for districts to do that. And you can take that information and really break down groups of students based on demographics, as Brenda mentioned earlier. So you can pull, it's important to note that every single student, grades 6 through 9, gets an updated Dropout Early Warnings System score 2 times per year. However, you can break down that information and just look at groups of students. You can break it down by race. You could break it down by disability and by disability type. You could pull students based on their age, there are opportunities for different teams to be able to look at the students that they are serving at that time. Also on this sheet, you see how to access the Dropout Early Warning System information on WISE- for District. On the right-hand side of the screen, then, you see some reflection questions. This gives teams the opportunity to have some discussion around what is it that students need, what are some potential interventions that can be put in place to help support students, and then who are some staff members that can really help to build those relationships and make those connections to make those interventions most supportive. On this page as well, you do have a grid to track some information to help support those discussion points. In addition to that form, you also have access to a grid form that allows you to track information over time. As we mentioned, there is that ability to put interventions in place to help support students, and we want to be sure that we're using data to assure that the interventions that we're putting in place are actually supporting students and are making those gains. So this tracking form allows you to track information over time. So you see there's a space for the student's name, and then you can track those same pieces of symptoms of risk that we discussed earlier for each quarter of the school year. The goal then would be that you are closing in on some of those symptoms and that we're seeing increased exposure, increased opportunities for students. Both of those forms are available to you on this PowerPoint by simply clicking the links, clicking on the pictures, and it will bring you directly to those forms. So as we are digging into this data, as you're reviewing this data, we would support you and we would encourage you as a team to work together to identify, if you are working at a high school level, who are some students who graduated and who dropped out. But if you're at the middle school level, really digging into who are the students who need the most support, so that data piece, and then identifying what needs they have, tying those needs to evidence-based interventions, and then tracking those interventions to assure that they are supportive to the students. So again, you have those reflection pieces when you're going through the data. What are the strengths and needs of the students? Who are our current students who are at risk of not graduating and why? And what supports are needed? At this time, we would ask you to pause the video and work with your team to dig into your data.
Welcome back. One of the things that Jen talked about was that team and what does that team look like. Before we get into that, we're going to talk a little bit about the purpose and really the importance of looking at that data in an ongoing fashion. As a middle school teacher, I don't know if I really knew what I did at the middle school greatly impacted graduation outcomes. So I think it really brings an awareness to looking at your graduation rate for your district is in comparison to what our statewide graduation rate is, and start some conversations around that. It also gives you time as a team to inform interventions for students that are at risk. So taking the time to think about whether you're seeing, like we talked about, like a trend with students, or if a student needs some individual interventions in place. And then finally, really taking the time to identify those students who have those risk factors of not graduating early. It gives you time to talk about the data, how your data is reviewed, and then your data team, and then who might be missing. So that team can be fluid. We have a slide here, and if you click on the picture, it will take you to page 17 will take you to the research of what this team looks like, where that comes from. So as you start this conversation, some other possible team members that to consider are other administrators on your team, and this includes your special ed leadership. Are there other teachers missing? Special education, general education staff, and then any data management or student interventions or support staff that you might have in your district that might want to come to the table. And that could include school counselors, teachers of CTE work, and then again, like that intervention. And then finally, folks that can help make the financial decisions. As your team discusses what interventions might be wanted to be put in place, it will really help you have a more robust conversation if you have those members at the table.
So then as you pull that team together to really support that ongoing use of data collection, rather than just sitting down and looking at this once, but really identifying how this can directly fit into the supports that you're providing students, we encourage your team to discuss the following points. Has your team considered how you're going to ongoingly collect the data and how you plan to review that? Are there other data points that you feel would be valid to collect as well? And then how will the team work together to train to make sure that they understand the data and that it's meaningful? Again, this would be a small team that you're pulling together. So then how will the team share out that data with staff who are supporting those students directly? Another point to consider is, are you using data safely? Is the data that is being mined still private? Is it for the people who need the data are getting it and it's not made public? And then finally, as a team, are you using data to systematically drive and evaluate your interventions? So again, we don't want to just select an intervention and if it's not working, keep doing it. We want to identify, is the intervention that we've selected directly supporting the student? So really, we encourage you to have those discussions as a team on how you can evaluate the effectiveness of your interventions using data. Now what? Now that you've collected the data, what can you do to start to dig into some interventions that are evidence-based? We know through Wisconsin resources that there are a lot of evidence-based interventions at our fingertips that we can dig into. So let's talk about some of the resources that are available to you through the state of Wisconsin. When you open this PowerPoint up, I just want to note, I'm not going to open all of the different links right now, but you can directly click on the pictures and it will bring you to those resources that we're discussing. The first is the Raising the Cap series. The Raising the Cap series allows educators and teams to review the research about increasing graduation rates and participate in reflective activities. Also to discover effective practices to put in place to support students. Each month the Transition Improvement Grant puts out a new Raising the Cap series, so there are different topics that you can look at. The second resource that is available to you is the Graduation Rate Improvement Research, Support, and Resources Packet. Here, it really pushes the importance of those evidence-based practices. We know if we want to close gaps for students, we need to be using interventions that are based in evidence. This takes out a lot of that research piece for you and gives you all of the research that is effective to close opportunity gaps for students and increase graduation rates. This research comes from our national partners, which we'll talk about on the next slide, but links you up with evidence-based practices, the specific literature. It also links you up to resources that you can utilize to implement those evidence-based practices within your district. And finally, gives you practical examples that are directly tied to those evidence-based practices and you can see other districts implementing. The next resource that we have are the Promoting Excellence for All modules, and this was developed through the Department of Public Instruction. The Promoting Excellence for All modules provide information and strategies that have been successfully used by Wisconsin educators to raise achievement of students of color, closing the gap between them and their peers. These schools that these examples are coming from represent all grade levels and are for students in urban settings, rural settings, and suburban settings. One piece to note is that these Promoting Excellence for All modules are directly linked to the Wisconsin Graduation Rate Improvement Planning Tool, which is the next resource that I'm going to share with you. As you're going through these Promoting Excellence for All modules, they are directly linked to effective instruction, student and teacher relationships, family and community engagement, and school and instructional leadership. The next tool, as previously mentioned, is the Wisconsin Graduation Rate Improvement Planning Tool. Here, teams can look at data collection relating to graduation, dropout, as well as the dropout early warning system that we have reviewed today. And this allows teams to take a needs assessment related to the following practices: school leadership and district-wide diagnostics, school and community collaboration, student educator learning supports, and effective instruction and targeted interventions. Here you see a direct link to the Promoting Excellence for All modules that were previously brought up, but also research that comes from our national partners. The final resource that you have linked on here, as you see the picture on the bottom, is the Transition Improvement Grant. As Brenda mentioned, our goal through the Transition Improvement Grant is to support increasing graduation rates and reducing dropout rates, as well as increasing post-school outcomes for students with disabilities. If you have any questions on these resources or on this practice as a whole, you do have a regional coordinator that serves within your area of the state. And if you don't know who they are, you can click on the yellow arrow and it will bring you to a menu that will allow you to get the contact information for your regional transition improvement grant coordinator. So we have these evidence-based practices. That is what goes into the resources that we have in Wisconsin. It's important to note that this isn't something that the Department of Public Instruction or the Transition Improvement Grant made up on their own. These are directly linked to resources from our national partners. So just want to highlight the national partners that we do pull resources and research from. So we have the National Dropout Prevention Center, the IES, the Institute of Educational Sciences, and their What Works Clearinghouse, which really is pulls together all the existing research on how what's working in education. We have the Everyone Graduates Center, which was highlighted earlier and in the previous session. We also have NTACT, the collaborative, which identifies and offers targeted assistance on evidence-based practices to increase post-school outcomes. And finally, we have the CEDAR Center, which houses the National Dropout Prevention Center for students with disabilities. And one important thing to note is the CEDAR Center directly pulls research from the National Dropout Prevention Center. So this is where we are pulling our evidence-based practices and research from. So what's next for your team? You guys have all of these resources that we shared. You've had the opportunity to review data, and you've had the opportunity to think about how you could put together a data team. How will you take this information to start working to improve outcomes for students within your district relating to evidence-based practices or building your capacity as a team? This Framing Our Commitments worksheet really gives the team the opportunity to talk about what are some action steps that we would like to complete within the next 30 days, by the end of the school year, potentially over the summer, and then for next year. So it gives you that opportunity to set some commitments to really work on increasing outcomes for students.
So as we end today, I just wanted to remind you that this is typically where we stop and do Q&A session. If you have questions after listening to this, Jen did reference that you can reach out to your TIG coordinator, but also feel free to contact myself or Jen at any point. You'll see on this slide our emails and phone numbers. We truly want to help districts move this work forward, so we're here on the other end of your computer until COVID is done at any point to help guide you through this work.
And as we end our session today, we're going to end with a PSA that was put out through the National Education Association on graduation rates.
The future is in your hands. The world is yours to shape, change, and improve. But it can't happen if you drop out of school. This is Aloe Black. High school dropouts face a future of lower paying jobs, poorer health, and a cycle of poverty. But with that high school diploma, you're setting yourself up on a path towards a good job, higher education, or training, and a bright future. The world is ours, but you can't claim it if you don't graduate.
So what power you have to help support students through some of the resources that we shared with you today and the data review. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And We look forward to hearing how reviewing data and digging into some of these resources have assisted your team.
Thank you.